everybody. Thank you once again for tuning in. Today we are starting a new series with a special guest, which I'll get to in a moment. But this new series is called Malazan Debrief, where, just like it sounds like, I'm going to talk with someone just after they finished a Malazan Book of the Fallen book and just talk about their sort of gut instincts about the book and some of the details while they're fresh in the mind. I think these books are so rich and full of discussion topics, I don't want to stop talking about them just because I put out a review. So I'm really excited to start this out, and I'm really excited to have this guest on with us today, Brittany from Books with Brittany. Brittany, thank you so much for coming on to this first episode.
Of course. Thank you for asking me.
Brittany is is an awesome booktuber in general, but is one of the first kind of pioneering Malazan content creators who is reading the whole series. I was just telling her before we started recording that I actually found her because of her Memories of Ice review, and I couldn't find anyone else who was talking about it in detail, and I found her video and now follow her and her channel, so super pumped to have you on. Do you want to talk a little bit, before we get into this, about your channel generally and what you read besides Malazan?
Definitely a mostly fantasy-focused channel. I do read a good amount of sci-fi and horror, but definitely fantasy-focused. So I'm working my way through the Malazan series right now for the first time, and then also I'm rotating each month, so I'm working my way through the Wheel of Time series for the first time as well. So one book every other month, basically.
You're tackling the two mammoths at the same time. That's very impressive.
They're so different from one another that like everybody always asks if it's hard to keep track of everything, and I don't think it is. They're so different. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
And again, highly recommend, if you have not subscribed to Brittany, definitely subscribe to her. And if you are just finding out about her and you want a first video, she has a fantastic interview with Steven Erikson, and probably everyone who's watching is a Malazan fan, or at least have heard of it. For the most part, it's spoiler-free. There's a couple spoilers or, like, names thrown out there. But overall, I think anyone can read it, and you'll get a sense of Steven Erikson, how great of a guy he is, and the series as a whole. So definitely check that out if you haven't. I have actually watched it twice because Steven Erikson, you just got to listen to him a lot. Like his books, I guess, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So Brittany has just finished Midnight Tides, which is the 5th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And I should stay here at the beginning. This is going to be spoiler-filled for that book and probably all of the books beforehand. Since the 5th book isn't really tied to the other ones, there won't be too many other spoilers. But just as a warning to everybody, we're going to get into that without sort of hesitating or mentioning anything. So sorry if you have to get off now, but thanks for joining us, I guess, for a couple minutes. But Brittany, I wanted to first ask you my experience with Midnight Tides. I opened it up, started reading it, and I remember being, and I've told you this privately on chat, I was so frustrated in the first 150 pages, like, I'm starting over again. Like, I had already, started Gardens of the Moon and then started over again in Dead House Gates, and I felt like I was in the groove after House of Chains, then just completely thrown into a different continent, literally, a different storyline, all new characters. And while eventually I kind of got over that, it was frustrating the first couple hundred pages. So did you experience that? What was it like starting out with an all-new story?
So kind of similar to what you said, the biggest shift for me was going from Gardens of the Moon to Dead House Gates, because I actually DNF'd Gardens of the Moon and then had to reread it.
Mm-hmm.
So getting over that shift and then getting into Memories of Ice and another change, I was like, okay, this is fine. And then starting book 4, like I was prepared for like new things every time. So when Steven Erikson told me like it's going to be another shift again, and then everybody said the same thing, I was like, that's cool, we're here for that. That's what we do in this series. And then I started it and I was like, I don't think I'm having a good time.
Yeah.
I'm so concerned because this is the first time in a long time that I couldn't get into it. And I loved the prologue. So the prologue hooked me. It was just when we really started getting into, like you said, those first 100 pages, which when you messaged me, I was like, okay, he said, we're going to get through it. And you were not wrong. I think it was, I don't know, right about the time that you said that it started picking up and things started making more sense in my head. And it wasn't that it wasn't interesting, but for some reason, this time I had a really hard time, like getting oriented in this place with like the politics of the dynamics, I guess, of power and what was happening and what they were fighting for, I guess.
Yeah, and because it is, I was just listening actually this morning to the 10 Very Big Books podcast, which I always shout out. They're great. They're going through Minute Heads right now. And they point out, it's kind of funny, in the prologue, it's like this massive, like, huge races fighting against each other and skykeeps and, you know, Kachain Shamal and all this stuff. And then, like, the first 150 pages is like, here's some brothers, and they're really upset about seals being killed. You know, like, it's like so different. Yeah, exactly.
Seals. I was like, are we really talking about seals right now? Yeah, it took me a minute.
Yeah, and he's like running through the forest for like 50 pages, and you're like, okay, so what?
Yes.
Well,
that was really a struggle.
And the other thing I mentioned to you, I think, in that chat that we referenced before was, for me at least, the Udenas storyline starts out kind of rough as far as keeping my attention, and then the whole Feather Witch thing is kind of weird, and I was a little lost there. But you mentioned that you really enjoyed that, so tell me a little bit about your experience with Udenas in this book.
I think I was just instantly intrigued, especially with the dynamic between Udenas and the Feather Witch, and I actually have read a lot of complaints about people really disliking the Feather Witch in the book, and I didn't at all. I mean, I don't necessarily think you're supposed to love her character,
right,
but I think it was well done, and I loved their interactions. So I don't know, that was like the one thing that I was holding on to, I feel like, at the beginning, to like keep me going through it.
And on that score, because the Feather Witch sort is when she's drawing tiles, were you able to immediately sort of draw the connection between that and sort of like the Deck of Dragon and the Warrens and everything going on there, or? Because I will say, I did not. I was really confused about what was happening, but I know a lot of people like love that reveal, even though it's never stated outright. Did you kind of draw that parallel or see anything along those lines, or was that sort of a steady thing as you kept reading?
More a steady thing as I kept reading. I mean, I kind of thought that it would be something related to that, I suppose, with like the visions and prophecy type of thing. But no, I'm so bad at reveals. I don't tend to make a lot of predictions. I just read for like the enjoyment of it, and I think that's kind of rare from people that I talk to. They're always like, I think this is going to happen next. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay, I'm ready to find out. So when a couple reveals happened in this book, I was like, oh my God.
That's funny you say that, because I'm the same way. I just did a video of the Wheel of Time tag, and obviously I'm not going to say spoilers, but they were like, what were some of your predictions that turned out not to be true? And I was like, I don't really read with predictions in mind. Like, that's just not how I read. Like, I actually don't like mystery novels for this purpose. Like, I don't really try to figure it out. I'm just kind of like, I trust you, author. Take me where you want to go.
Yeah. I'm so glad that someone else finally doesn't do that.
And I think that probably helps us with Malazan, because I think a lot of people get stuck on that with Malazan, like trying to figure it out, and it's pretty much impossible. I mean, I'm sure some super smart people are able to kind of see the pieces, but I especially would never have seen anything that coming at all.
Oh no. When I'm able to piece like little things between books together, I'm like, oh, fantastic.
Yes. And then I doubt myself. I'm like, did that really happen, or am I making that up? So let's go to the other brothers. So T-Hole and Benedict, or Benedict?
Yeah. Benedis, right?
Benedis, that's right, yes. I got nervous there that I wasn't going to remember. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think I did say it wrong. Hold on, I think you were correct.
In my head, I just say Benedict, like Benedict Arnold, but I think there is some weird spelling that could be different. But we'll just go with it. So there's Hole, who's the oldest, I believe, and then there's Benedict, who's the good swordsman, and then there is obviously T-Hole, who's a little crazy and hangs out with Bug. So what do you think of that family?
That was, I think, what made me struggle the most.
Okay.
I just didn't care so much about them in the beginning. Obviously, do you say T-Hole? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, I know a lot of people say T-Hole, so I don't know which one is right, to be honest.
So I liked him the best, and obviously that was the most interesting, but I really struggled with, like, caring a lot about the other brothers. And I don't know if you were intrigued right away with their family, or...
I just remember being confused. There's so many like brothers and families. Like at the beginning, you're definitely getting like Troll and all the Sengars, and then you're getting all the brothers in the Latheri Empire. And now that I'm thinking about it, that's a pretty cool parallel because obviously all of them are going to clash and have various different viewpoints on that clash. But at the beginning, I wasn't seeing sort of the poetry of it, and I was more just like, there's so many names and brothers and family relations that I am trying to keep track of. And that's on top of the usual Malazan stuff where like it's a new world. You're gonna get like who's the Sita after Sita? There's an emperor and a king and then a king's consort, and like you're getting so much information. So I think at the beginning for sure it was just like I was getting piled on top of information. But eventually, obviously, I mean, Tehol and Bug, I think, are pretty universally everyone's favorite kind of bromance. But were you go? Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, were you able to get to the point where you had those straight in your head later, and then sort of get drawn in later?
Yeah, I still think with the. Do you say Latheri or Latheri? I don't. It doesn't matter.
I say Lether and Latheri.
Latheri. Okay, I said Latheri too.
Okay.
And then with Palace, with the siblings and some of the brothers there, even by the end, like I just really didn't care as much about their story, but definitely Tehol and Bug, like I always had them straight. And I think at the beginning I was just like, why is it important he's on the roof sleeping so much?
Yeah.
Or like, but no, I enjoyed the comic relief that they brought.
Yeah, it's such a shift of tone. It's almost like Discworld. I actually haven't read Discworld, so actually it's what I think Discworld is like. Kind of like silly, a little over the top. He's wearing a sheet or he's naked or whatever. All these things is so like un-Malazan like. Although there's a ton of comedy obviously in the Malazan world, but not sort of that. I don't know, Erickson's grasp of like having that sort of feel, but also still feeling like it fits. I don't know how he does it, but it works really well.
Well, because I think his humor is like very distinct. Like it's very different from how a lot of authors would approach humor in their books, especially in the midst of such an intense fantasy story where like terrible things are happening.
Yeah, and terrible things do happen. That's actually a good transition because after this sort of introduction and avalanche of names and places and things, we finally get our first sort of plot point, which is the sword, right? That the Sengars need to go get the sword. So tell me a little bit about, like, you're reading that journey. Did that hook you? I know some people don't really like sort of the fetch nature, like fetch quest or side quest nature of that. I've heard some critiques on that. What did you think of that whole storyline?
When he asked them to go get the gift at the time we didn't know, I thought that was going to be like a much bigger part of the book, and so when it kind of wrapped up quickly, I was like, oh, okay, what now? And then obviously you see, but I enjoyed that, especially with Troll. Yeah, it was Troll, and like everything he had to go through.
Yeah.
The way back, like I don't know, I loved all of that, and I think that's when I really first started to see the connection between the brothers and how their dynamic, like he was so mad at Roulade, and then he still was so upset by his death, and just watching their dynamic, that's when I started caring for their sibling relationship a lot.
Yeah, and that's really where it like comes out, where it's starting to get real fishy, right? Like what actually is happening, and who are the Tisti Eater, and I always call him the Witch King in my mind, but that's not what his name is. But like what is this whole thing? And you see Fear, who's like this big honorable, the firstborn, and he is going to do the duty no matter what, even if it's questionable. You see Troll, who's starting to question this, and then you see Roulade, trying to prove himself and doing his whole Roulade thing. And yeah, you're right. Like you see the sibling like tension, and that like reflected in the Eater as a whole. Like it's so impressive how Erickson thinks about how to represent this struggle with us. So when they're going back, Were you ready for what happens to Roulade? I mean, I don't know how you could ever be, but did you at all see that foreshadowed at all? Him? Okay.
I figured because he grabbed the sword, like that something was going to happen, but I didn't know anything really about the sword at the time, or why the Warlock King wanted it, or that it was associated with the crippled god. So I definitely didn't expect that. But I was here for it. I liked it.
Yeah.
It happened. I was like, okay.
Yeah, speaking of not predicting stuff, I actually, when I read it, did not put together that it was the same sword from the prologue in the whole book. It wasn't until afterwards that I was like reading some people's thoughts on it that I actually connected that very obvious connection. But
I don't know if any of his connections are really obvious.
that's a good point. Thank you.
I don't think I ever like thought confidently that that's what it was, but I remember like, okay, if there was a significant sword
Yeah.
conversation in the beginning, I bet it's related to this.
Yeah, and that is fun that, we talk a lot about how Malazan is sort of a critique of the fantasy genre. Like, how many fantasy genres have cursed swords or magic swords that people have to go get, and, that causes whatever to happen. And so that storyline could have been really, like, rote and, tired, but, like, this doesn't feel like any of those other stories, like, at all.
And I think it has some to do with like, I don't know if you would say like the world building, but I'm not somebody who always pictures everything as I'm reading it. I don't know if you are or not. I guess a lot of people do, but I feel like I could always picture everything that was going on, and his world building is just so fantastic in this book specifically that it makes it so unique, I think, from other just quests, go get this object stories in fantasy.
Right. And like you said, it's so fast. I also thought this was going to be okay. This is what these people are going to be doing the rest of the book. But it's like one, part or book within the book. And then they get it. They're on their way back, and Troll gets them back. And then, of course, we have, I think, a beautiful scene, which is the burial of Roulade with the coins. And then the terrible scene of him waking up and then assuming his place as emperor or king. So, what were your reactions to reading what I see as like a batshit crazy turn in the book?
When I decide to sit and search fan art for like an hour straight, because I'm like, they still have all of the gold coins on him.
Yep.
Like, he's just walking around with that. Like, did Erickson really do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously. Because I feel like half the things in the book sometimes I'm like, is this really happening? Or are they like imagining
Yep.
this? But yeah, I felt, surprisingly, I felt kind of sorry for Roulade. I had so many mixed emotions about his character throughout the book, and just seeing how it changed. But like, I think it was pretty clear from the beginning, wasn't it, that like he didn't want that?
Right. Yeah.
Just kind of wishes that he could just die. But I don't know. That's when my attention was really grabbed, and I was like, okay, we have this person back from the dead. I'm ready to see where this goes.
Well, so you are a very good Malazan reader because you had compassion on him right away. I certainly did not. I have to be honest. Especially when he goes for Fear's betrothed. What's her name? I'm blanking on her name.
It starts with an M, I think. Mayan?
Yes. So when he makes that move, I was furious with him. Like truly, like, I love reading fantasy, but it's rare to actually like get like real world emotions, while you're reading a book that like last. And I remember I was like, it changed my whole mood, like furious that Roulade had done that turn. And then for the rest of Midnight Tides, he was like, I hate this guy. that was my thing. So you are a much more compassionate person than me.
Well, I just felt like she didn't seem that bothered by it.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, I guess she kind of has the duty-ness as well, I guess. That kind of is how it felt.
Yeah.
So let's shift back to the Latheri Empire. It's been a while since I read it, so I'm trying to get my timelines right. Because while this is going on, primarily what's going on over there is Tehol starting to like embezzle and start his whole scheme, right? Am I missing anything in that storyline?
No, I think that's what's
Okay, so was that, while this is happening, was that sort of drawing you in as well, or was it sort of like, okay, get me back to Troll and the other things happening with the Tisty Eater?
Yeah, it was more so that. And it was funny, and I appreciated having the lighthearted conversations and the banter between them, but I was like, I don't care as much. Like, I want to get back to the Tisty Eater and, like, see what's going on with them. This is the storyline I want to follow. We have just, completed the mission that the Warlock King sent us on, and now Roulade's back. Like, I want to know what's going to happen here. And I think with, like, Udenas and the Feather Witch also being with the other group of characters as well, I think I was primarily interested in reading about their storyline, and I just kind of didn't care. And I remember saying, because instead of a review for this one, I did like a reaction blog, reading blog.
Oh, awesome!
And I remember saying that it was really jarring for me to have all the seriousness going on with the Tisty Eater, and then all of a sudden be like, doing silly stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of pulling you out of the story.
Yeah, it's definitely a vastly different two storylines.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So one thing Erickson said in that review that I referenced, or that interview that you did with him that we referenced earlier, and again, go watch it if you're watching this video and haven't seen it yet, is that he thought of Midnight Tides as sort of if the indigenous peoples here in North America, particularly I think he mentioned the Lakota Sioux, were able to stand against sort of an empire that was coming against them. And, all wrapped up in that is like ideas of colonialism and white supremacy and all these terrible ideas, like what it did. So I'm curious with this clash of Tisty Eater and Latheri, and both of them sort of having their pluses and minuses and good people and bad people that we have met. What was your mindset going into like their initial clash on the battlefield?
I was just trying to understand, and I don't even know if you were supposed to, or I probably just missed it, to be honest. Like, who was the stronger group to begin with, and like who had more power? Do you know the answer to that question? Was I supposed to know that from the beginning?
Yeah, so I think, and again, this could be a misperception by me, but I think the Latheri are really like the empire and the powerful force on the continent.
Okay.
And they're especially known for like having this like really strong chaotic magic. And whether that's right or wrong, I sort of saw that as a parallel or slight metaphor for like the British Empire's navy, or the gunpowder that European colonizers had, and that sort of thing. Sort of like a power that's not available to the Edur that the Latheri have.
They just wanted like to conquer more.
Exactly. Yep. And especially they did it again, analogy to British and American Empire, like very economically. Like they would slowly buy land from natives and then make them dependent on certain goods and services that only the Latheri could get, and then would slowly take over. Like that was kind of their thing. So I think the Latheri are supposed to be sort of the powerful empire that's slowly expanding, intruding on the seal hunting grounds, etc., etc. And the Edur, I think, are supposed to sort of represent like smaller, tribal, more ancient world, honorable warrior society, both in its positive and negative aspects.
Yeah.
So I think they're supposed to be the underdogs.
Which is like what I got by the end. I think I just spent a long time trying to figure out like which was which.
Yeah.
But I think you asked me before, like, what did you think about? Not like whose side were you on, but that's something that I feel like every Malazan book that I read, I'm like, I don't know who I'm supposed to be rooting for. And I went back and forth so many times of like, okay, who do I want to win here? Because you're following characters from like both the groups of people, really. So I love that about his books in general, and especially in this book, is it's not like, okay, these are the good guys, we're rooting for them. It's always kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like his moral ambiguity is so good, and I also feel like it's real moral ambiguity. Sometimes when we talk like around, like I know you're like me, a big fan of what some people call grimdark, and sometimes in that genre, moral ambiguity just means like a good guy, or like the good guy is a bad guy. Kind of like the Logan Nine Fingers. He has a killer streak, whatever. Like Like there's some that's kind of like moral ambiguity, but like Erikson does real moral ambiguity where like everyone involved in this fight is in the wrong, and can also sometimes do good things and be compassionate but be not, and you're not really cheering for a winner, especially towards the end of this book where it just gets like this horrific war that is just like awful on both sides and terrible atrocities. I remember particularly that one scene. I don't remember the guy's name, but you're in the head of like a captain, I think, of the Latheri army or a scout. I can't quite remember. But you're just like in his head during the battle. We're just like everyone's getting slaughtered and they have no idea what to do. And then I think he eventually just like dies at the end of that perspective.
I think I remember what you're talking about. Yeah, but it got crazy.
Yeah, because I like walls of sorcery that just like eat people alive, and then like the like Roulade screaming. Oh, like there's just some awful but great literary wise like imagery in Midnight Tides.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I had some particular questions from people in my Discord that I said, hey, I'm interviewing Brittany about Midnight Tides. What do you guys want to ask? And so I asked a couple of them sort of already in some of the questions I've asked, but one particularly is they wanted to ask open-endedly, after your interview with Steve and Erikson, you're probably one of the few people on Earth who have been able to interview Steve and then still read Steve. I've never talked to him. I should probably call him like Mr. Erikson or something. You got to interview him and then, read a book by him. So how did that change your perspective? Did it at all? I'm curious about that experience.
I think so. I remember he, like you referenced already, he specifically talked about the inspiration for this book, and I don't think I necessarily directly thought of that because I'm not like a history buff by any means, and so it's not as easy for me to see like direct parallels he's drawing from that. But I think more so just knowing how much of like the real world or history that he's putting into it, and like he talked about with like the layers of him being what is the word I'm looking for right now? I'll get back to it if I can think of it.
Sure.
But I think what I noticed so much and why I liked this book a lot was because we got a lot of history throughout the world building, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
A lot of the like the races that were referenced in other books or that we learned just a little bit about, and so I could really see like all of the thought and like planning he put into like revealing some of these things, I suppose. So just noticing more emphasis on all the intricacies that he has in his writing, I guess.
It's his. I can't even fathom like thinking of this story in my head and being able to write it out on the page is just unbelievable.
Well, and I think he said, if I'm not mistaken, that this was one of his favorites. I think he said he has 3 favorites, and this was one of them. And I've had a ton of people tell me this is their favorite, and I guess now I wish I could ask him more of why, or other people why. I don't know if you like what your favorite would be up to this point, because obviously I've only read these 5.
Right.
I think 3 and 4 I enjoyed so much more than this, and I still enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah. I think so. I'm trying to think back without thinking of the whole series as a whole. I think my highest ranked of the early ones is Memories of Ice, which is not super rare. And then I think Midnight Tides is going to be next for me. And I really love I'm kind of a sucker for the economic critiques of sort of capitalism and imperialism that's in here. Like that's really like my shit. And so I really love that about Midnight Tides. But I do think the story of Midnight Tides is more tied to later books than like a Memories of Ice. Like Memories of Ice you could almost anyone could pick up and just read, but Midnight Tides really is more part, like it continues on, which is not a negative, but I think that's why Memories of Ice is just slightly sort of ahead of it for me, but I really enjoyed it. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I guess too, while the other books sort of introduced new characters or plot points and started out new again, they still followed like pieces that were started in earlier books, and I'm such a character-driven reader, and so I guess the way that book 4 wrapped up, I mean, I was just like destroyed emotionally because of everything that he had happened.
Yeah.
And that's maybe why I didn't have quite as much emotional attachment, because I had already had other books with those characters in it. And I know we do have a couple characters in this book that have been mentioned before, but not as in depth as the other books. So I'm guessing that that's probably why. And maybe I'll be curious to see once I finish if what this book brings to the series makes me enjoy it more in hindsight.
Yeah. Well, so you actually already answered, I think, one of the other questions we had, which is where does Midnight Tides rank right now for you in the series? It sounds like you're 3, 4, then Midnight Tides, or is Deadhouse Gates a little higher? I know you really liked that one as well.
It's so hard to say without rereading them. So originally I liked Gardens of the Moon way more than Deadhouse Gates. I know if I reread them that probably would not be the case, but I actually like House of Chains more than Memories of Ice, I think.
Wow.
I know it's because we wrap up the whole Felice and Tabor thing, and I loved having the first chunk of the book follow just Karsa and one. I wouldn't want every book he writes to be like that, but I really enjoyed what we got in that book. But I can't confidently put them in order without rereading them because I feel like I'm just getting better at reading the books.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone can just jump into this series and be a pro at reading it. It's taking a few books to stop looking for a resolution, in one book alone, or a clear, concise plot direction even, and just chill with the people. And I think that the other thing about Midnight Tides is it feels, other than the bits of history about I'm going to say this all wrong, the Tisti Eater and the Tisti Andy, whatever. I loved all of the history, but besides that, it felt so contained.
Yeah.
The scope of the world in this book didn't feel as big. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because it really is, after the prologue, is massive world, 10,000 years, whatever it was beforehand. But then, it really is some brothers and 2 nations, and they're fighting, which does, in this series, that's contained. You know what I mean? Compared to, continent-wide rebellion that you're getting in, Deadhouse Gates and House of Chains. Anyway, and Memories of Ice, I guess actually they are going through a whole continent as well. So no, that makes total sense. I think I've told this story before, but when I first read House of Chains, I actually had to double check after 100 pages, did I accidentally pick up another series that Erickson has written? Because I don't know who this guy is, and we're just following. This doesn't feel like Malazan at all. And then of course, it gets to where it is. But you are certainly a rarity for liking House of Chains the best. I applaud that.
I think it's because his ability to make me change my mind about how I feel about characters is just wild.
Yeah.
And I knew going in that Karsa is a lot of people's favorite, and that he was very polarizing. And when I started reading it, and I was like, yeah, this guy's cool. And then you see what he does, and I'm like, you are messed up people. Why do you like him? Tough reading, and then there's some growth that happens
right
at the end, and I learned to appreciate. And I read his essay, "The Problem with Karsa Orlong," and but yeah, I don't know. I think that has a lot to do with why I like that one the best.
Well, we're getting to the end of our interview, so I'll ask you a very open-ended question, because the end of Midnight Tides, actually every Malazan book, is always so crazy. There's so much to talk about. I'm going to kind of leave you to guide us here. Tell us your feelings about the ending. Was it satisfying to you? Like you said, we're used to, at this point for Malazan books not to end sort of with other fantasy books would, but how did you feel about the ending as a whole? Okay.
Things not resolved. And I'm trying to remember the whole group we have at the end here. Because we have Kettle and Udenas going to... Oh my god, what is her name?
Saren? Saren Pedak?
What did she say?
Saren Pedak?
Yes, her.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about her, but she was one of my favorites.
Oh, yeah.
Shirk and Kettle were my favorites. I don't know if that's how you say Shirk's name either, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's the hardest one. It ends with a Q. Come on, Erickson. How are we supposed to say that?
But who else was... Oh, Fear. And then I was just so...
Yeah.
I'm like, but he lived up to his name in the end, and he's being a coward, and he's
Yeah, no, absolutely.
not helping Troll, and that's where you see the dynamic with he really cares for his brother still, because Fear is like, what are you trying to accomplish? And he's like, well, there has to be some other way that this can end.
Yeah.
And then Fear is just being a coward and is like, I'm out of here. I'm done with this. And I really want to know what's going to happen with Udenas and Kettle and Seren and their whole gang. I think that I'm assuming we must pick up with them somewhere in the future.
Yep, yeah. Reaper's Gale. So Bone Hunters, you're going to go back to Seven Cities, and then Reaper's Gale, you'll get back to Latheri.
Okay.
So typical Malazan, jumping around and making you wait a whole book before you get back to the storyline. And by that point, you've probably forgotten about that storyline, but then you remember. It's how Malazan goes.
And I'm just wondering, like, what's going to happen with Roulade. But I also think that with Roulade and Troll, when we see in House of Chains, is at the beginning, or we're following his story, like, periodically. But the first time we see him with being, like, forsaken, or what is the word that I'm looking for?
Yeah, abandoned. Yeah, he's chained on the... Yep.
So when is that? When is that in relation to all of this?
So they are not going. So they're never going to draw a clear line for that for you. They're going to kind of leave you to put in the pieces, because I think it's at the end of Midnight Tides. I should have gone back and double checked this, but he's already been like found out as a traitor, right? Or they're looking for him as a traitor.
I believe so.
Yeah. So basically, you're gonna have to fill in like, okay, that's how he gets to that place. Yeah. And then they'll jump back into that storyline like there. So you've gotten as far as you're gonna get. That as far as they're gonna connect those dots, that they've already done that. So
isn't that enough? That is like satisfying alone.
Yeah.
Because the whole time in House of Chains, I'm like, well, what'd this guy do?
Yeah, exactly.
So.
So they'll jump back and they'll just kind of expect you to sort of put those together. But
I think I have a lot of questions too about the Crippled God and like how the Warlock King. I'm assuming he was trying to get the sword to like draw on the power. Because of what's his face being dead. It's not. Is it Silchus Ruin or is it? No, it's.
So Silka. Sorry, what?
Scavendar.
Yeah, Blood Eye. Yeah, the Tisti Eater who was in the the prologue, who killed Silkas Ruin.
Right. Yes. Okay. So yeah, I just want to know more about the Crippled God and what he's doing.
My lips are sealed. I don't feel comfortable talking about this without accidentally giving something away, but I think that's what you're supposed to do. So I know you said you don't predict things, so feel free to say, I don't know, but like any of those loose threads that you're feeling like, I kind of have a guess, or like, is Roulade as Emperor, anything like that?
I mean, if I just said like gut instinct right now, I don't think Roulade's going to be real important in the grand scheme of things.
Okay.
I think the Crippled God would just use whoever he needs to accomplish things, but that could be totally wrong. But honestly, like, I don't even know, like, overall predictions, like, what I think is going to happen. So.
I think that's probably the best way to read Malazan, to just be like, I don't know, let's just keep reading.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Anything that I did not cover in Midnight Tides that you want to, get out onto the page, into the ether, or you feel like we covered sort of your thoughts and feels in this debrief?
I can't think of anything specific that we didn't talk about that I wanted to.
Awesome. Well, as I said, Brittany, I so appreciate your Malazan content. Keep it up, and thank you so much for joining me on the first ever Malazan Debrief.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Like and subscribe. Thank you guys for watching. As always, first in, last out.